Amen. So last time we talked about, I do have a picture up there. Good. Just want to thank the church for fixing my wire here. So I have a projection this week. Last week we didn't have it. So, but as we go on, I'm going to drum this home, A, B, and C. So the majority of the book of Revelation is about the tribulation. And so chapter 6 through 19 is all tribulation. So 22 chapters. First five are historical and the scene in heaven. And then after chapter 19, the end of the tribulation, you have the millennial kingdom and the new heavens and the new earth and all that, the future. So we're going to see that I'm going to focus in on A, B, and C and try to pin points wherever we can on these or hang things on these known points. So A is the rapture, the four horsemen of the apocalypse, the very beginning judgments, which I call World War III. That's just my own thinking about it. But whatever you want to envision there or interpret. I do want to reflect here. I made a new slide. Okay. Anyway. So I drew it on the board the other day, but I've never had a slide, and I thought, well, I should make a slide. Oh, by the way, AI generated this graphic. I've been using it more and more. I just go on there and I say, okay, I want a puzzle square, and I want four pieces, one in each corner, that are labeled A, B, and C and D, and it made it. So I just put it in here. Yeah, I mean, the way it is anymore, you can generate an entire movie by just giving it a paragraph of sentence. It's amazing what it can do. And it's in its infancy. We'll touch on that more later. But anyway, the whole book of Revelation is like a puzzle, and focusing in on the 7-year tribulation, the brunt of the book, you'll see that we have a huge puzzle called the book of Revelation. Many people have tried to understand the puzzle, but I believe the Lord has shown me that you have to approach it like a puzzle. And so you have to know the basic pieces. In fact, even the people that disagree about the interpretation, vast majority believe there's an A, B, and C. They know there's a beginning of the 7 years, there's a middle, and there's an end. They may disagree about some things, but they all pretty much, except for the preterist, that's just a fancy name, meaning they don't believe any of it. It's all symbolic. It has no reality to it. So those people are in for a crude awakening when the rapture occurs, and they're mostly left behind. I'm not saying they're not all born again, but most of the people that hold that view probably are not taking the Bible literally. So Jesus said you have to be born again, and if you don't know that much, he went to that high religious leader and said you have to be born again, a guy who should have known everything. And so, if you don't know, that's the beginning point. Being born again is where you start, right? In other words, that's the beginning of the journey. Confucius. Confucius said, "Journey of 1,000 miles begins with the first step." So that in the Christian walk, the first step is being born again. Once you're born again, then you're on a journey the rest of your life towards sanctification and eventually glorification. So in this puzzle, focusing in on A, B, C, and D, what we see is the beginning is the rapture, and we know where that piece fits in the corner. And we know that B is when the Antichrist comes and uh, makes everybody take the 666 mark. And then we know there's the end, C. And C is when Christ actually comes back again. In other words, every eye shall see him, which is totally different than the rapture, which is a hidden coming. And then you have D. I'm not going to focus on D, but just to fill it out properly, after he comes back, the whole purpose of coming back is to set up his millennial kingdom for 1,000 years. And we're going to see it actually says 1,000 years. So people have tried to dismiss that away and spiritualize it, make it into like an abstract concept, but it's actually a kingdom. When he came the first time, he he offered the kingdom. As he said, I want to be your king, right? He rides into Jerusalem, and then they denied him and crucified him. So they rejected him. The religious leaders, not the Jewish people. People get that wrong. Many of the Jewish people received him and recognized him. Remember in that crowd, give us Barabbas, give us Jesus. There were quite a few people that said, give us Jesus. So the Jews in general did not reject and crucify Christ. The leadership did. The leaders, and Caiaphas, the head of them, said it's better for one man to die than a whole nation will perish. And so what he meant is if this guy really comes into fruition and we recognize him as the king, the Romans are going to come here, wipe out our country, take our cushy jobs away. And so they said, we can't have that. They must have known who he was. That's the only thing I can think of. But in their scheming little minds, they decided under the help under the direction of Satan that they were going to crucify him. So these are the points. So everything in the book of Revelation, especially chapter 6 through 19, will fit in A, B, or C, and then chapter 20, 21, and 22 go into point D and beyond. I call the final point E, but I don't have it here. E stands for eternity. So after the millennium, we go into eternity. We're studying the trumpets, and in the trumpets, we have 7 trumpets, and the first 4 trumpets we studied, and of course, we also studied in the past the 4 seals are like parallels. And the first 4 trumpets we saw are the third judgment. So a third of the land mass, the atmosphere above the land, the trees, the grass, the waters fresh and salty around it, that area were all destroyed. And then we come into the Great Tribulation, and the Great Tribulation is when Satan actually is cast to earth, and we'll see more in chapter 13. I believe that Satan actually inhabits the physical body of Antichrist. And I'll go further into my theory on that one, which I think, given modern science, is very reasonable. But the whole idea is Satan wants to be worshipped as a man on earth, and he's mimicking Christ, right? Christ's ministry, he came on the scene, he's God in the flesh, he preached and taught, and then they killed him. And after 3.5 years, he resurrected, right? So they killed him and he resurrected. So Antichrist is going to come on the scene for the first 3.5 years, and he's going to, not that they won't recognize him, they won't know he's Antichrist, but he's going to present himself as Messiah. He's going to mimic Christ. That's the whole idea. The Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Satan is the Father, Antichrist is the Son, and the unholy spirits are the demons and the fallen angels. So it's an exact mimicry. And I personally believe he's going to be 30 years old. He's going to mimic everything about Christ. And he's even going to have his own John the Baptist. We call him that the false prophet. But we'll delve into that much more detail in chapter 13. So in the 5th seal, we see that the altar of souls, that's when all the tremendous martyrdom is going on. People are being beheaded. And then it correlated to that is Satan being cast to the earth. So at the midpoint B, 3.5 years into the tribulation, that's when Satan is cast to the earth. And at that point, that's when I believe that he inhabits the Antichrist person, a real human being. And then he says, I'm God. And that's when literally all hell breaks loose, because hell has come to earth, right? People talk about hell and raining hell on them, a lot of this loose language, especially in movies and media about hell, but they have no idea what hell is until the Antichrist comes. Then you have hell on earth. Thy hell be done on earth as it is underneath. It's like a total, I'm sure there'll be something like that, some kind of prayer they have to say. So what happens is he comes on the scene, and then that's why the last 3.5 years is called the Great Tribulation, because when the 5th trumpet sounds, Satan is cast to earth, and he is limited to the earth. He can go anywhere now. In other words, we think Satan is in hell, but he's never been in hell. Satan has never been in hell. You say, well, I don't believe that. Well, go back and read Job. Was he in hell? No, he's right before the throne of God. So Satan is free to go wherever he wants right now. He's not locked up yet. And so he is finally going to be cast to the earth, and the import of that is he's going to be limited to the earth. He's not going to be able to go wherever he wants to. And at that point, it says he knows his time is short, 3.5 years, that he will rule the world. So the kingdom of Satan will be the kingdoms of this world in a dramatic way. He already controls the world, but it's going to be in a body to be worshipped. He's always wanted to be worshipped. Remember the temptation of Christ, right? Said the devil told him, if you worship me, I will give you all these kingdoms. Well, you would think Jesus would say, you don't own all this. God owns all this. No, he didn't argue with him because Jesus knew that Satan controlled the world. He's the God of the world. He runs the world. God the Father does not run the earth. Nowhere in Scripture does it say that, except in where we are. We are the ones he rules over. We're the King of Kings. We're the kingdom of kings. Then he's the king ruling over us. So I'll just throw that in, and we'll dwell more on that later. But the whole idea is that we're going to see in the seventh trumpet, which is going to come a little later, that it then finally says in the seventh trumpet, the kingdoms of this world are now become the kingdoms of God. Well, then you have a dilemma. If they're now the kingdoms of God, well, whose kingdom were they before that? And that's at the very end of the tribulation. So the world now is under the control of Satan. Tribulation is when hell comes to earth. The great tribulation is where an antichrist becomes Satan in the flesh and wants to be worshiped. Again, that was always his goal. When he tempted Christ, he said, worship me. He wants people to worship him. And if he can do that, then he is truly beaten God. That's what he thinks. So that's why we have anti-Semitism, and that's why he's going to be in a body in the fifth trumpet here when he's cast to earth. There's a lot of scriptures here. I'm going to go over this, past some of this, because you can look when you get the slides, and you'll see that there are scriptures that talked about, like chapter 12 and 13, that talk about what happens when Satan falls to earth, and we'll study more in depth later. So this is just an overall chart to see where we've been. We see that the four seals are parallels with the four trumpets, not parallels in the sense of one for one, but as I call it, the four horsemen, I believe, are one super event, right? So I call it a mega event. So it's like World War II. You had your African campaign, your European campaign, you could call it Russian campaign, and you had your Japanese campaign. But we don't call it by those names. We call it World War II. So if you study World War II, in fact, there's entire documentaries on each of those because each of those was its own entity. But we just give it the label World War II. So that's why I'm calling this World War III. And there'll be these four different entities, judgments that will occur. And then I believe the four trumpets are the result, as I mentioned last time. And so whether it's purely supernatural or there is the human component, whatever you want to label it, it's going to be a horrible time. Keeping in mind 1/4 of the Earth's population, Revelation 6:4, 1/4 of the Earth's population is destroyed, wiped out, destroyed. And so if you think back, well, how many people were killed in World War II? And it was if I remember right, when I was researching it, hundreds of millions. And not just our troops, but I mean around the world, all the implications of World War II. It was the most horrible war that's ever occurred. And they estimate that World War III, if I'm correct, and that there's going to be a nuclear exchange between Russia and the United States and our allies, and that's 1/3 of the landmass. Then at that point, 1/3 of those who are left, um, will be destroyed. I mean, 1/4, 1/3 of the landmass and that surrounding it, and 1/4 of the population. We're right now 8 billion. So if you do the math, 1/4 of 8 billion is 2 billion, 2 billion. And so that leaves 6 billion, right? And finally, we're going to find out that in these judgments coming up, that 1/3 of the earth is destroyed and killed. So that if you take 1/3 of 6 billion left, you have 2 billion left, right? So, so that's, excuse me, 4 billion, right? 8 billion now. So there's, yeah. So literally what's going to happen is by the time you take the 1/4 that was killed initially, plus the 1/3 that's killed later on, you have 1/2 of all the earth destroyed. Out of 8 billion, that's 4 billion. I got to go back to remedial math, I think. But so that's not speculation. That's just the math. In other words, that's pure math as presented by God in figures here. So the 8 billion is roughly what it is now. And by the time this occurs, there'll be more people. It's the Earth's population is dramatically increasing. So it's exponential. In other words, it's just not addition. It's not 2 times 2, but it's exponential. It's like an exponent where you're timing itself all the way up to larger and larger amounts. So the Earth's population is dramatically growing as we speak. And these things are going to happen, I believe, in the near future. I don't know how near, but we're getting close. So if we take the word as future, if we take the word as predicting what's going to happen, then we can apply current environments and situations, do the math, and figure out what this means. I mean, we can't really understand it. What does it mean to have 1/4 and 1/3 of the Earth's population destroyed? I mean, there's can't conceive of that. I can't conceive of 1 billion people, let alone 8 billion people. I don't know if you stacked them, in a line in a queue all the way to the moon, probably go beyond the moon, right? There's so many people that are on the earth. And the fifth angel, when he sounds his trumpet, there's something else that happens here that is very, very important. And that is something that's never happened before. And that is that he sees the fifth angel sounds his trumpet. Remember, there's 7 of them. And I saw a star from heaven which had fallen to the earth. That's what I was just talking about. And so this star is used to indicate angelic beings. So then you have to say, okay, is this a good angel or a bad angel? Um, the way I see it is that the star that is falling from heaven here is a godly angel. And the reason I believe that is because God has sealed in this pit these creatures, these fallen angels, I believe they are. And so only God can unseal it. In other words, the enemy cannot unseal what God has sealed. So that's why I see it that way. It means that God has kept them in this place for a particular time. And that thought is resounded in Jude and in 2 Peter chapter 2. So in Jude and 2 Peter chapter 2, especially in Peter, it says that the angels who left their first estate, in other words, they were down here in Eden and they were corrupted and they corrupted men and they had relations with women and made the Nephilim giants. Those fallen angels were kept in a special place. They're put in the bottomless pit. And the bottomless pit in Greek, it's just abuso. We call it abyss, the abyss. And there's a movie about that. And we have certain, like the Mariana Trench and the Puerto Rican Trench, these huge, huge chasms in the earth that go down. The one off Puerto Rico goes down like 5 miles. And they've sent some probes down there. So, but when we think of it, even if the only thing we can relate to is one of these great trenches in the ocean, it's still not bottomless. There is a bottom to it, but this is a spiritual pit. It is bottomless. So what's going to happen is that this pit's going to be opened for the first time since the book of Genesis. And smoke will go up from the pit like the smoke of a great furnace, and the sun and the air were darkened by the smoke of the pit, verse 2. And out of the smoke came forth locusts upon the earth, and the power was given them as scorpions of the earth have power. Well, I don't know that I've ever encountered a scorpion. Anybody ever seen a scorpion or had one around them? Oh, okay. Ileana, what, you kept it as a pet or no? It killed it. Okay. That's my girl. All right. Yeah. So I know our son had his RV out in Arizona off of Phoenix and in the desert, and I think he encountered a few of them. They live out there at night. They come out and they're everywhere. But anyway, I digress. So I think we know what scorpions are, even if we haven't killed one. So they're horrible little beasties. And these things obviously have a supernatural component because they were told that they should not hurt the grass of the earth, nor any green thing, nor any tree. Okay, but only the men who do not have the seal of God on their foreheads. Well, this is interesting. So what does that mean? The seal of God on their foreheads. How does that happen? That's one possible interpretation. But I think because of the context of the whole earth that's within this pericope here, I think that it has to do with all the people who are believers during this time. Doesn't mean the ceiling for the 144,000 is for protection as much as anything else. However, we know that the other believers during this time will be martyred, many of them. So it's not from protection from death, but protection from spiritual attacks like this. So it's interesting. God seals people and the devil seals people. All right. So we have God, the anti-God father, Satan, the Antichrist, whose name is Antichrist, Antichristos. Then we have, of course, the spiritual counterfeit Satan has going throughout the earth. So these particular creatures, if I'm interpreting it properly, appear to be fallen angels, the worst of the worst, that are locked up in this pit. Peter calls it Tartarus or Tartarus, I've heard it say. So Tartarus is a place that's at the bottom of the bottomless pit. In other words, you think you can't get any lower than a bottomless pit? There's something lower under there, however that's possible. And so God knows who is sealed, and the enemy knows who is sealed. So during the tribulation, there's probably going to be a physical mark on people. And God's people, I doubt if there's going to be a physical mark. It doesn't really say that, but he knows the seal. There is some kind of seal. And Satan knows it, by the way. When Satan comes up against any of us as born again believers, he doesn't need an external seal. I don't need something on my forehead. He knows who we are. He's well aware of the fact that you don't belong to him anymore. So we're all sealed. In fact, Paul says in Ephesians 1:13, when you believe, you heard the word, you believe, you are sealed with the Holy Spirit. So there is a seal. Paul used that word definitely. Sragizo, meaning to seal something. So we are sealed. And so anyway, but these creatures, and you can interpret them however you want. It's possible that they are some sort of chimeras in a naturalistic explanation. In other words, could be that they're hybrid creatures that have been created that the fallen angels control, or it could be these are purely supernatural and God has allowed these to appear in this form. It's not specific enough for us to tell, but I do know that for the first time in human history, scientists are making hybrid creatures illegally, but they're making them. So, and sometimes they find them on the shore. I've seen pictures of them where they probably dump them in the ocean and they wash up on the shore and they've never seen anything like it. It's obviously several different creatures in one. So that's something to think about. I think you'll hear more and more about that as we hear about gene editing and the genome project and CRISPR and all that, making new gene creations.
something that flies and is metal, and they're using swarms.
Oh yeah, that's a insect like a robot. Yeah, a little spy robot. Yeah, so if you kill one, kind of look at it and see whether or not it has computer parts. Just kidding. No, that's you're right. No, they no, they really they that exists. I've seen it. Yeah, I mean their government is trying to do things like that because they want an effective spy tool. If you can send a little mosquito over to China and have it buzzing around the Premier Xi, see what he's saying, that would be a good tool. But anyway, these creatures, I call them chimeras, which is an ancient Greek term for a monster that has like many heads and different bodies. But anyway, so we have to understand about the heaven and the earth and underneath as it's referred to. Personally, I believe that the Hades, we call it, underneath the earth is a spiritual concept. But if you believe it's actually in the earth as physical, that's fine. Um, the only reason I believe it's got to be a spiritual is because when the new heavens and the new earth are made, then Hades would have been done away with. If it's really part of the earth, then the new heavens and new earth would do away with it. But we know that the judgment, especially Gehenna, is eternal. So that's just a free thought there. The abyss is the shaft. Remember in the parable Jesus taught of Lazarus and the rich man, which by the way was a real story because Jesus never used real names unless it was a real story, something he knew and probably the people he was talking to knew. So when he told that story, he said, here Lazarus is in Abraham's bosom. That's where we get the name for it. And over across this great gulf, this chasm, the word would be the same as the abyss. Across over the abyss, he could see, people in torment. And so Lazarus, if I remember right, he says, Lord, send a warning to my brothers on earth because I don't want them to end up over there. But that's where we get the good picture I've drawn here. And that is Abraham's bosom is where the believers went during the Old Testament, and torments is where the unbelievers went and are now. And then you have the abyss in between. And so just this shaft that goes down forever, at the very bottom of it, the bottom of my picture is Tartarus, the word Peter uses, which is the place where the fallen angels are locked up. So the reason I put this here is so you can understand when it says they're unlocked, that they're coming out. This seems to be where they're coming from because it's the only logical place in Scripture. So continuing on with verse 9, and in those days men will seek death and will not find it, and they will long to die, and death flees from them. This is the part I don't understand. If these guys are already dedicated to Antichrist, why are the demons tormenting them? I think it's just probably just the character of Satan. It's not just he wants people to worship him, but he's cruel and mean, and he wants to torment them for some reason. Maybe because he's tormented. I guess that's the most logical. He's miserable, so he wants everybody to be miserable. That's his game plan. So, and the appearance of the locust was, in other words, and then he goes into an appearance that he saw. He actually saw it, but then he's grappling with how to write this. The Lord helped him, gave him the words. What can I liken these things to as to things that I'm experiencing? In other words, in my life, in my first century world, I see something. What is it? And he says there were horses prepared for battle. In modern parlance, you might say armored personnel carriers. In other words, he wouldn't know what that was. If he saw some mechanism in the future carrying people in it, then he would think, well, why do I know this like that? Well, the only thing I know would be a horse or horse-drawn carts and things like that. So that's what the Romans had. And then he goes on and he says the crowns were like gold and crowns meaning that which is covering the face, and the faces he could see are faces of men. So it appears that there were men inside what could be golden helmets inside some sort of mobile vehicles is possible interpretation. They had hair like the hair of women. Could be that they actually had long hair, or it could be that they had like maybe electronic wires connected to the helmet. So you got to put yourself in the first century. If somebody saw like an Apache helicopter, Black Hawk today, and saw the pilot with his visor on and all his suit and with his gear and the wires coming everywhere, this might be what he's talking about. I don't know if it's it, but it's not totally out of the question. Teeth like lions. Well, could be that he's referring to the weapons they have in the front. The teeth are, of course, what the lion uses to tear apart and kill its prey. So it could be. They had breastplates like breastplates of iron. Well, in other words, they were shielded, like our modern weapons have extensive shielding all around them. They're bulletproof, basically. But here's the kicker. The sound of their wings was like the sound of chariots. In other words, horses rushing to battle. So I've never heard that, seen movies, but even in the movies, they do a good job of capturing that sound. It's like just continual roaring. Remember Ten Commandments, Moses and the gang are up there against the Red Sea, and one of the guys go, "What's that, thunder?" And then somebody else says something else, and he says, "No, that's the sound of chariots." They couldn't see him yet, but it was rumbling the ground. I think it's like that. So, it could very well be that he's describing something that's natural, but it also could be purely supernatural. It's real either way, isn't it?
So somebody interpreted it. Military helicopter, they have like big eyes, and then everything coming out is like the hair of a woman, and the teeth is the part of the helicopter, and that, helicopter.
Yeah, and some of them they paint teeth on the front lower part of the helicopter. As they do, they decorate their vehicles. So I don't know. Yeah, I've heard that, and it's possible. It's also very possible that these are, like I said, chimeras, biological monsters, best way to put it, biologically created monsters. And then again, it's also possible that these are purely spiritual, that God is I don't know that God has made them. These are evil creatures, but somehow either the fallen angels are perceived like this, or the fallen angels are controlling the creatures. There's a number of ways to look at it. And they have a king over them, and he is the angel of the abyss. Well, we just saw the abyss, right? The abyss is this huge pit without a bottom, but at the very bottom is Tartarus. That's why I think it's very possible that in the Hebrew, Abaddon, Greek, it's Apollyon. It means destroyer. So this bad fallen angel, and I think that's what it is called a destroyer. So, Michael's a warring angel, but he's never called something like destroyer. So destroyer is a term of this a term for evil. So this seems to me in the whole context, in the context of the other scriptures, to be a case where these fallen angels who've been locked up all this time are finally let out to go upon the earth and be under the control of Satan and cause havoc everywhere. Mayhem. There's a commercial that there's a guy who goes around creating mayhem. Well, he's like a little Satan. That's what Satan does. Satan is the big mayhem. So again, to reinforce, we have the 7-year tribulation. It's divided into different terminology, same time period. 7 years, split in the middle, three and a half, the Great Tribulation, the last part. 42 months, it says sometimes, the first 42 months, the last 3.5 years. 1,260 prophetic days. Prophetic month is 30 days. So that's in the beginning. So in other words, whenever you see these terms, they all mean the same thing. God's just using different terms to explain the same exact time period. So that's the import of what I'm talking about here. We have studied point A, and gone over that. We're now looking at B, which is the fifth seal, and we're going to see that C is coming up, and C is the end of the tribulation when Christ returns at the Battle of Armageddon. And just to correlate further, I have a little graphic here. And the whole idea that I've seen is that as I take puzzle pieces, I have to align them in one of the corners. Remember, we started with the puzzle, A, B, C, D. So where do these pieces fit? Well, you can tell where these pieces fit because they all fit into the Battle of Armageddon in the last time of the tribulation, the very last days. I think the last day, actually, literally the last 24 hours. But just as an aside, we're going to study further about the bowls later on. I believe the bowls are the very last judgments leading up to the final Armageddon battle. And I was talking to Brad last week, and we talked about the fact that what we have here is that I believe it's like D-Day. Okay, so in other words, the largest fleet ever came up to the shores of Normandy, and tremendous battleships. And before one soldier went on that beach, they bombarded the Nazis with all these tremendous guns from the battleships. And so they call it softening up the enemy, right? Making it easier for the troops. Not that they had it easy by any stretch, but imagine if they hadn't softened them up, would have been even worse. So I believe this is God softening up the world. And also I believe that these are like, and it's pretty obvious to me, and many expositors, that these bowl judgments, when we get to them, are the judgments of Moses. And that's why I believe I know the two witnesses who come in the last 3.5 years. The reason they come is there are no witnesses. They're the only two people, like Moses and his brother Aaron. They're the only two people that can go before Pharaoh. Okay, so all the other people have fled. Remember, as soon as Antichrist says, "I'm God," they all split, or they don't take the mark and they're dead. They're either dead or they're fled or dead. It's where all the people are. So these are exactly like the miracles of Moses. So that makes sense, because if one of these two figures, which I believe are clearly Moses and Elijah, and you say, how can you say that? Because on the Mount of Transfiguration, who did he see? Moses and Elijah. And what was the Mount of what happened? It was his transformation, his glorification. They got a snapshot of what it would look like when he comes back to earth. The two guys he's coming back to earth with are Moses and Elijah, and they're the two witnesses that go up and then he comes back with them. So it's the only logical explanation. Some people say one's Enoch, but it doesn't make any sense because he's not part of the Testament. Also, the Jews said to Jesus, if we would have Moses and Elijah, Moses and the prophets, Elijah stands for the greatest prophet. If Moses and Elijah would come, we'll believe them. Well, the Jews here are going to have Moses and Elijah testifying against them and pointing out who the Antichrist is. So it all fits together, but that's for another lesson. So the main thing is that the last trumpets, the fifth and sixth trumpets, correlate with the fifth and sixth seals. And even though most of the bowls don't correlate as such, they're independent in a lead up. The sixth and seventh bowls also, all sixth and seventh judgments of seals, trumpets, and bowls, in the red here, they are all the same event. They're the mega event, which I call Armageddon. Well, it's not, I'm not calling it. The Bible calls it Harmageddo. The mountain of Megiddo, the valley of Megiddo. So there's a great earthquake, and you'll see that in the sixth seal, and you'll see in the seventh bowl, there's a great earthquake. Okay, and in the seventh trumpet, which is our main focus right now, the second coming is revealed. Seventh trumpet, by the way, is not until chapter 11, but it says the kingdoms of this world are now Christ. Well, that's when he actually comes back to earth. Till he comes and sets foot on the Mount of Olives, the kingdoms are not his yet. He's coming back. Once he's on the Mount of Olives, at that point, then the kingdoms are his. So, and he's destroyed his enemies. So, but the lead up to that is the Euphrates has to be dried up, and there's 4 angels that are loose there, the sixth trumpet. So what's going to happen, and I believe it's going to be in one day, and I've calculated it out. The Chinese army, which they've already built a super highway, which they can go from China down to the Valley of Megiddo very quickly now. And you can go on Google Maps and map it out. down through Iraq and through there, you see they have something called Highway 1, goes all the way to Armageddon. At any rate, so what's going to happen is that the Euphrates is dried up, which allows this huge army to come across, and they then will be within 24 hours in the Valley of Megiddo. Because I mapped it out. I did calculations on the speed of tanks today, and they'll be a little faster by then. So by the time that they would hit the Euphrates, where it's dried up, until they would come to Armageddon at the top speed of the tanks would be less than a day. So from way up there into Armageddon on the superhighway, within 24 hours, they'll be at Armageddon. So that's why I say it's one day. And so at that point, they're all coming to Armageddon. All the armies of the world are there, and they look up, and as Zechariah 12:10 says, they will see him whom they've pierced and mourn for him as an only son. Every eye shall see him. He's coming back like lightning from the east and the west. They're all going to see him. We will be with him. We're all coming back. The armies of the world are in this huge 200-mile valley, getting ready to fight Christ. And a sword comes out of his mouth, and there's no contest. There is no war. That's people call it the Battle of Armageddon, because there's no war. The war never really gets started. He just puts an end to it. And at that point, the world then becomes his physically. In other words, at that point, Satan no longer has any control over the earth, and we will live in the millennial kingdom for 1,000 years. And I think I'm out of time, so we will just wrap this up and move on to chapter 10 next time, just to say that those last two, 6 and 7 trumpets are called the last two woes. The first woe is the 5th trumpet of the martyrs. And then we have the 6th and 7th trumpet, which are really two sides of the same coin, which is the battle of Armageddon and Christ returning. All right, so I'm going to ask my wife to close us up in prayer. And if you have any questions, please stick around and I'll be glad to go further.